Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is September 6th. On this day in 2018, an ordinary night in Dallas turned into a tragedy that would extend far beyond one apartment complex. 26-year-old accountant Botham Jean was sitting in his living room eating a bowl of ice cream when off-duty police officer Amber Guyger walked through his door. She thought she was entering her own apartment, but within seconds, she pulled her gun and fired. Botham was gone before he even had the chance to speak. His murder and the legal battle that followed sparked outrage, exposed deep cracks in how police shootings are handled, and left behind a legacy that Dallas still carries today. Today, we're discussing the murder of Botham Jean. Let's get started. It was just after 10 p.m. on September 6, 2018. Amber Guyger had just finished a 13-and-a-half-hour shift with the Dallas Police Department. Still in uniform and carrying her service weapon, she pulled into her apartment complex's garage. She parked on the 4th floor, one level above where she actually lived. Meanwhile, directly above her apartment, Botham Jean was winding down his night. Born in St. Lucia, Botham had moved to Dallas for college and built a promising career as an accountant at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Friends described him as disciplined and kind. He was the kind of person who sang at church every Sunday and welcomed everybody with a smile. That night, he was simply at home, working on his laptop and enjoying a bowl of vanilla ice cream. Meanwhile, Amber Guyger thought she was heading to her apartment, but didn't realize that she was on the wrong floor. The apartment she thought was hers actually belonged to Botham. Now, the differences were obvious to anyone who was familiar with their own home. His unit had different furniture, a larger television, and, unlike hers, no bright red doormat outside of the door. But Guyger apparently didn't notice any of that. The door to Botham's apartment hadn't latched properly, so when she tried her key, it swung open. What happened next took just seconds. According to her, she stepped inside, saw a silhouette across the room, shouted commands, and fired 2 shots. One struck Botham in the chest. He collapsed. Despite efforts to save him, he died shortly after at the hospital. The Dallas Police Department placed Guyger on administrative leave. Within days, she was fired, and the investigation was turned over to the Texas Rangers. Initially, prosecutors were hesitant. Just 3 days after the shooting, Amber Guyger was arrested, but she was only charged with manslaughter. Dallas's police chief at the time described the case as, quote, a very unique situation, end quote, suggesting that there was uncertainty about whether it was truly a crime or just a tragic mistake. But outrage grew quickly. To Botham's family, to community leaders, and to the people across the country, this wasn't just a mistake. A young man had been killed in his own home, unarmed, and doing nothing wrong. The message felt clear. If this wasn't treated as murder, then what did that say about accountability? By November 2018, a Dallas County grand jury reviewed the case more thoroughly. They upgraded the charge from manslaughter to murder. District Attorney Faith Johnson explained it bluntly, quote, at the moment of the shooting, it was an intentional event, end quote. Justice groups like Color of Change praised the decision, noting how rare it was for police officers to face murder charges for on or off-duty shootings. For the Jean family, it was the first sign that Botham's life might not be forgotten in the legal system. The trial began in late September 2019, and it was one of the most closely watched in the country. The courtroom was packed, and emotions ran high. Guyger's defense was simple. She was exhausted, disoriented, and genuinely thought that she had walked into her own home. Taking the stand in her own defense, she broke down in tears, quote, I was scared to death. I never wanted to take an innocent person's life, end quote. But prosecutors pushed back hard. They pointed out every sign she had ignored: the missing doormat, the different furniture, and the fact that she wasn't even on the right floor. They pointed to body cam footage from officers trying to save Botham, showing contradictions in her testimony about whether she had rendered aid. Their argument was that mistakes might explain confusion, but they don't excuse a trained police officer firing a weapon without thinking. On October 1st, 2019, after just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of murder. The courtroom gasped. For the first time in decades, a Dallas police officer was convicted of killing a civilian. The next day, Guyger was sentenced to 10 years in prison. For some, it was too light of a sentence, but for others, it was still a rare moment of police accountability. Then came a moment that stunned the nation. At the sentencing, Botham's younger brother, Botham Jean, addressed Guyger directly. Through tears, he said, "I forgive you." He then asked the judge if he could hug her. They embraced in the middle of the courtroom in an image that was broadcast around the world. For some, it was an extraordinary act of grace, but for others, you couldn't help but ask questions about who is asked to forgive and when. Guyger appealed her conviction, but in 2021, the Texas Court of Appeals upheld it. In 2024, her parole request was denied. She remains incarcerated with a release date set for 2029. In November 2024, a civil jury awarded Botham's family nearly $98.7 million in damages, a symbolic recognition of the value of his life. Botham Jean's death didn't just spark a courtroom battle, it led to tangible changes in Dallas and across Texas. One of the most important was the passage of the Botham Jean Act, better known as Bo's Law. Signed into law in 2021, it requires Texas police officers to keep their body cameras activated throughout any investigation or encounter, closing a loophole that had allowed officers to selectively turn off recordings. It was a direct response to the lack of clear evidence in Botham's case. In March 2021, Dallas also renamed a 4-mile stretch of Lamar Street, running past Botham's apartment and the Dallas Police Department headquarters, as Botham Jean Boulevard. At the dedication ceremony, city leaders and family members gathered, and Mayor Eric Johnson said, quote, "He is forever part of our city," end quote. Now, every time someone gives an address on that street, they speak Botham's name. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found Botham's story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!